Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest episode of our entertainment show. As you know, each month we've been running a feature called Icons of the Entertainment Industry, where we look at actors, actresses, celebrities, renowned stars who have made a notable mark within the entertainment industry over a long period of time. That means a star-spangled career, whether it be in music, whether it be in acting, whether it be in all forms of entertainment. And our special guest this evening is what you call an all-rounder. She has so much experience, whether it be in music, whether it be in Broadway, whether it be in acting, TV series, movies. She's done it all. She's going strong. She started off roughly back in the 1970s, still up as far as 2020, still being involved in movies. So roughly 55 years roughly in the business, in the entertainment industry business, still going strong, a pioneer for women's acting and women's music as well. Very well known within the country music circles as well. Obviously, you might have guessed it now, the one and only Susan Anton. Susan, pleasure talking to you today. And wow, 50 years in the business, still in the business. Does you almost feel that times you thought yourself, well, I can put my feet up now for a year or two?
Well, I've been doing that a little bit since COVID, even though I wasn't ready to do it, I kind of had to do it. And it ended up being kind of a good thing too. I think for, those of us that were able to stay healthy, to step back and kind of reassess and look at our lives. By the way, thank you for that beautiful introduction. Makes me feel like I actually did something.
And Susan, I suppose growing up in California, roughly in the 50s, you graduated in college in the late 1960s. But growing up in California, did you grow up in a sort of a prosperous neighborhood to a middle class sort of family? What was your lifestyle growing up? Did you have much in terms of your family? Did you have much? Did you have many siblings? Were you catered to a good quality of upbringing, good quality of life? Did you have an awful lot of financial resources growing up?
Well, no, my growing up years were, I think back in the 50s, you actually had a middle class, and we were middle class. My mom and dad always had more than one job. I'm one of 5 children, and I was raised on an apple farm. So I literally rode my horse to school. I went to a one-room schoolhouse when I was in the 3rd grade. And then I picked apples. I worked in my grandfather's apple shed. So we were never rich, and I was never trained in show business, but I was fascinated by the idea of being a part of the industry because I love to watch the old movies on television in black and white, and especially the musicals. So I thought, oh, I want to do that. I want to be a part of that. I had no idea how or which way I would go. Nobody in my family was in show business. So we're basically, just hardworking people that in Southern California, up there in the mountains. So finding my way into show business was just kind of my magical journey.
And Susan, that brings an intriguing point in terms of role models, because you ask many actresses, many singers, who was their role model, and they all mentioned Marilyn Monroe. But obviously, for you, Marilyn Monroe wasn't probably relevant in terms of growing up. So delving up, who were your sort of role models? Because you're probably going back to the 1930s in terms of people that would have been, say, born in would have been 20 or 18 in the 1930s, but would be roughly around 30 years of age or 35 years of age come the 1950s. So
when I was a little girl, I watched the movies on television, movies that had once been in the theater, but now they were on TV. And so I really loved Doris Day. I thought, she could sing, she could dance, she could do comedy, she could do drama. And I thought that she was just a very special actress. But I also adored Frank Sinatra and music like that. And then when I got into my teens, like everybody in the world, it was the Beatles, just everything the Beatles touched and did. And then, of course, I loved Barbra Streisand. Funny Girl came out when I was probably 16 or 17, and that left a very big impression on me. She didn't look like anybody else, and she didn't sound like anybody else. She had the most incredible, still does, incredible voice. And so those would be some of my influences when I was a little girl coming up.
Mm. And I suppose, Susan, in terms of growing up and graduating from California, you went down first the modeling sort of route. You won a Miss California beauty contest in 1969. Was that for you in terms of getting noticed, getting interest, getting a name for yourself, getting recognition in terms of pursuing acting to try and get the foot in the door? Did you, I dare I say it's an awful thing to say, but did you sort of use your looks for your advantage at a young age?
Well, back when I was coming up, women were still, if you were pretty, yep, doors opened more easily, and having the title of Miss California was definitely something that that helped me. I'm sorry, the gardeners apparently are. Can you hear that? Is that okay?
No,
Okay,
no, I can't.
you're okay. All right, honey, can you close the door? Sorry about that. Life goes on. But definitely, as I was saying, having no entertainment background in my family or studying, when I got into the Miss California, Miss America pageant, it was an opportunity for me to actually learn, to be on stage, to perform in front of large audiences. And then I was awarded a scholarship that I used towards musical training. So that it definitely helped me pursue what I never imagined was possible now became possible.
And those beauty pageants back in the 1960s, were they different to the 80s and 90s in terms of the way women were presented? Were they sort of more or less fame? Was there less bikini contests and all that? Was it very much more a talent act rather than
well,
a
especially
sort of...
James, the Miss America pageant was very specific that way. They really wanted this wholesome all-American girl. I mean, we wore one-piece bathing suits, that was as scandalous as we got, but it was also about a talent portion that they wanted to bring forward, that you had to do talent, and you had to have interview skills. And then you got a scholarship to go on with your education. Back then, women weren't getting scholarships for athletics or much of anything. And so to be able to get a scholarship to be able to pursue your education was, for the Miss America program, was one of the few places where a girl could actually get a little help.
And Susan, I suppose there's so much to delve through. I suppose I bring you on now to the 70s, and I suppose you got sort of national fame, obviously, with cigarette commercials, Muriel, that sort of, and your sort of singing background sort of took over in terms of that. And obviously, I suppose with advertisements, it's money, it's a pay gig. Obviously, it's to try and sort of get recognition. I don't know if you were a smoker yourself or anything like that, but in terms of variety and fame, you sort of got a sort of cult sort of following in terms of being associated with Muriel.
Well, Muriel, it was cigars, and Muriel cigars was, so it wasn't cigarettes, but Muriel cigars was a very famous campaign that the Edie Adams, who was a sex symbol in the 50s, was the spokesperson. And so when they launched the search for a new spokesperson, it was kind of a big deal in the United States because of football, so cigars and the NFL and being on the football broadcasts became a very big stepping stone, and to actually be signed to a product. The irony of it is that, now, of course, we don't advertise cigars or cigarettes. It's the last thing I would ever want to smoke, but I have to be fair to Muriel cigars. That was a very important part of my early days, and having a big contract to do those commercials. I did one with Tom Selleck, so we were both just starting out, and commercials were a really important way to do that.
And Susan, I suppose it gave you a chance to show off your sort of singing talents as well. And obviously you were able to delve and show that sort of country and music background. But you also got, around that time, you guest appearance in the Merle Griffin sort of show. And I suppose those sort of cameo roles on a national sort of a TV broadcast, you appeared over 30 times, and that's obviously variety as well. You're getting out there, you're getting to represent yourself and show your name. And obviously within that, in Times Magazine, mentioned you as the most promising face in 1979. So towards the end of the 70s, did you feel that you were embarking on more independent routes in terms of your own sort of projects instead of your own music in terms of TV? Had the 70s been that sort of a learning curve, that sort of education for Susan Anton, that she's going to take it forward now in the 80s?
It definitely, yeah, you know, when you have a chance to learn, because really was learning as I did it. I had no training. And so I learned along the way. So when I had the opportunity to have my own variety show in the early 80s, I knew that I wanted to have a real eclectic group of musicians, from Oscar Peterson to the Oak Ridge Boys to Johnny Mathis. You know, we had a very eclectic group, and I was one of the producers. That I said, I need to be a producer. If a show has my name on it, then I have to be involved with the writing and the producing and the guest stars and everything else. And Bob Mackey did all of the costumes, and it was something I was really very proud of. And so, yeah, I don't think that I could have had, you know, the nerve to say, have that much of a voice had I not had my training through the 70s of kind of feeling like I did learn something and I knew what I was doing.
And Susan, I suppose moving on to the 80s as well, and obviously 3 big movies for you throughout the 80s: Golden Girls, Spring Fever, Cannibal Run 2. Obviously delving into that acting role, into the actress's sort of role. Did you find that sort of nervous a bit, first of all? Because obviously a feature film is quite different to commercials. It's quite different to guest appearances on chat shows where you can be yourself. Now all of a sudden you're playing a different character. It's sort of fictional. You're portraying different actors. You're intermingling with other big Hollywood stars, big movie productions that have been doing this for 10 or 12 years. Was that sort of daunting at sort of first? Did you need that first movie under your belt to feel, yeah, I belong here?
Yeah, for sure. You know, and the thing about Golden Girl was my first film, and I was the lead. I was Golden Girl, this you know, Olympic athlete, this runner. But the way that I approached it was that I always felt that if you're going to be a convincing singer, you also have to be an actress, because every song takes on a character. If it's a sad song, a happy song, a storytelling song, it comes from a certain perspective. And when I would study Frank Sinatra, or, you know, any of the great, Barbra Streisand, when she would sing a song, she was always embellishing a character. And so I thought, well, I do know how to act, even though I have not starred in a film. This will just be like a really long commercial. But I found it such a great opportunity to have that kind of time to let a story unfold. And I was very, very lucky that I had a wonderfully supportive director, Joe Sargent, who had a great deal of experience, and he was very supportive of me. And the surrounding cast, James Coburn and Leslie Caron, and everybody was so encouraging that I was in a really positive situation that launched me out into other projects that I felt confident in.
Yeah, and Susan, around that time in the 80s as well, you delved into a first sort of big break in terms of your music career, a duet with country singer Fred Knopflod, Killing Time in 1980. Obviously got to the top 10 of the billboards and the chart boards across the United States. A country and music sort of vibe to it. Was that always the genre of music that you always wanted to go down that route? You mentioned being a Sinatra fan as well, right. So that's why I was just wondering, because you seem to be a lover of all genres of music. But was it country and music area that you felt most attuned to in terms of your own singing voice?
Well, you know, I really love rhythm and blues, rock and roll rhythm and blues. And the thing about country that appealed to me is that I always felt that country was basically the same thing with a different beat, because you're really singing about the human condition, you know, of heartbreak and joy and love affairs breaking up and then getting back together, and the whole thing like that. And also at the time that the country music opportunity came along, country music was starting to become the primary music. It took on a sudden popularity that it had never known. It was crossing over. And I've never wanted to pigeonhole myself, because I love comedy, drama, you know, thriller, and all of it. And I love ballads, and I love R&B and standards and country. I love it all. So when I was approached to do a country album, I was really excited about it, primarily because I loved the music. I loved the stories that the music was telling. And I loved working with Fred Noblock, which ultimately led to me working with Kenny Rogers, because I did have that country music foundation and I was a legitimate artist with a hit record. I was allowed, Kenny Rogers offered me to tour with him for 2-3 years, and touring with Kenny Rogers was an incredible highlight of my life. Oh, I lost your sound. I can't hear you.
Susan, back again, Joe. Susan, in terms of that sort of break in the music industry, obviously, did you feel at that stage were you going to be a sort of a 2-element entity in terms of acting or music, or did you feel, right, I need to focus on one over the other to try and push one and establish? So did you focus for a while maybe on that music and put the acting and the other elements of your life to the back burner for a few years?
No, and looking back, I wish that I had had the wisdom to do that. I was just so excited I was offered so many opportunities all at once. And so rather than standing still in one spot and really establishing that, because at the same time that my country music was taking off, I was offered to go on Broadway and do work with Mike Nichols, one of the most revered directors of the theater. And so that took me out of live performance for a good year, because I was doing 8 shows a week on Broadway. And when you're doing a show on Broadway, you really have no time for anything else. And so I was always I would get 5 steps forward, take a couple back, because then I wouldn't be available like for a movie or a television series. And so as much as I loved doing everything, sometimes I'd go back and I go, I wish I would have concentrated a little more fully just on the music for a while, because I think it's what I love the most. And I still enjoy it, I still enjoy it, but I think I could have done more.
And Susan, in terms of the 80s, in terms of that sort of career, I imagine you're probably a young woman in your sort of 30s as well. I'm not sure, you probably maybe had family at that stage as well, probably a young sort of family as well. I'm just sort of wondering, in terms of life's pressures and life strains, you seem to be involved in so many projects and so many things. Did it sort of take its toll for a while, or were you able to go through without any sort of side effects? Because obviously you're talking there about probably a 7-day schedule, a hectic, obviously, to manage the personal life and family life and marriage life and kids and all that. I imagine that's probably you're so engrossed in Broadway and theatre and music. Did it take its toll in any aspects of your private life?
Well, I think ultimately yes, I don't know that I would say it took its toll. I don't have children. Okay. And part of that is really because I'm one of 5 children. And as a kid, even though my mom and dad worked really hard and took really good care of us, I had a lot of responsibility to take care of my brothers and sisters. So it's like my therapist said, well, you already raised some kids. And I thought, why don't I want kids? Because I love kids, absolutely love them. So I didn't have children, but yeah, it was difficult to maintain a long, steady relationship, which now I have. I've been married for over 30 years and my husband's in the business. And so we share the same interests and we understand what it takes to succeed in this industry. But there were a lot of lonely nights, when you're a woman in the industry and you're relatively recognizable. It's not like you can just go out by yourself and go to the movies or, out to dinner or whatever without people kind of wondering, well, why is she alone and what's she doing? And to feel safe as well. So there was a lot of lonely nights in a hotel room after, you're up there on stage and you're in front of thousands of people. And then you go back to your whole hotel room and call room service. So I was really happy to get off the road. I was really happy to get home and prioritize that I needed to have a personal life. And that's when I met my husband. And so here I am 30 years later, as happy as can be, and no children, but we do have a dog and he's Irish. He's a Wheaten Terrier.
Okay. And Susan, you mentioned that. Was there an awful lot of unwanted attention as well in those earlier years in terms of, obviously, you've been propelled into national highlights. Obviously, you're going to grab attention, people are going to recognize you, and obviously there's people you like to meet in your life, and then there's probably people that you don't want to come across as well. Did that happen as well, in terms of maybe that bit of unwanted attention, maybe paparazzi, media, a bit of admirers, stuff like that, in terms of?
You know, I was really lucky that in light of this hashtag Me Too, you know, whole movement, I didn't have to personally experience that. And I'm sad for all of the ladies that have. It's out there, it's definitely out there, and we're trying to do something about it. But in regards to the invasion of privacy, that was always painful. And it was difficult because unfortunately, you know, a lot of the time the gossip magazines aren't necessarily looking for, you know, wonderful things. They want to find usually things that aren't true. And the only thing that was disturbing about that is that my family, you know, was so proud of everything that I did, and they enjoyed my career. So that when something would be sensationalized, or, you know, a headline, if I was having, if I was in love with somebody who was also famous, then you kind of become, you know, fodder to whatever sells a newspaper. And that was always a little challenging, more so for my family than for me, because I knew what was true and didn't, and what wasn't true. But mom and dad, you know, they're going to the local supermarket and their friends are kind of standing in the same checkout line as them, and they see some tabloid headline, they're like, oh. And so I think it was harder on my family than it was on me.
Yeah. And Susan, coming into the sort of 90s as well, in terms that you mentioned Broadway and TV series, and obviously the big thing for you in the 90s was Baywatch. You had a recurring sort of a role with that, with sort of David Hasselhoff, and an awful lot of young actors and actresses made their names in Baywatch. And obviously you're coming in with a cast, and probably an awful lot of young girls that were probably looked up to you in terms of the 80s and so. Did you feel like a sort of mammy figure on Baywatch, with all these sort of young, gorgeous, young, pretty girls around you in terms of that? And you sort of delving, maybe, did they ask you for advice? And any?
Yeah, you know, it was really fun because it was that part in my life now where I am not the young ingenue anymore. I know what it's like to be there. And I was really glad that I wasn't the one that had to put on the bathing suit and run on the beach. I was the mother. And so, which is customarily what I tend to do when I'm in any kind of cast, is I take on a mother hen kind of mentality. I love to be there for them. I understand the challenges of a career when you're young, and especially the girls. And so we became good friends. The girl that played my daughter, we would have a lot of really, you know, deep conversations about choices that, you know, that she wanted to make and how she wanted to pursue her career. And so I've always loved being in that kind of mentorship, you know, the older, wiser one, because I sure would have loved to have somebody there for me. I didn't have a female counterpart, you know, somebody that I had in my life on a regular basis that had been in the industry that could kind of help guide me. So I think I've always felt that if I can help in any way, I always wanted to.
And obviously working with David Hasselhoff, and this, obviously David was known through the music from the 80s and 90s and sort of Knight Rider before that as well. Did you form a close bond with David throughout Baywatch? And obviously you were probably one of the senior actors who probably had an awful lot of respect for you, in terms of you obviously were in the business, he was in the business, while an awful lot of the rest of the cast were only starting out. So I imagine he probably diluged and had more conversation because he probably more in common than the rest of them.
We had a great bond. David, still to this day, you know, periodically we'll bump into each other. We have great laughs. Our careers are somewhat parallel, like you said. You know, we're in the same kind of age group, and music and movies and television are all kind of parallel parts of our lives. And the thing about David is he's just so much fun. He was really great at practical jokes and keeping the set light and joyful. And so I think the two of us were kind of the parents on the set. You know, and it was really great to work with him. I found it to be such an easy exchange.
And Susan, going forward then, in terms of the 90s and 2000s, once you finished up in Baywatch, were you sort of, obviously you had been in the industry for more than 30 years, were you sort of saying to yourself, right, I can sort of pick and choose now what I want to do in terms of focus going forward. While the hectics were 80s were so hectic, you were, as you said, you were saying yes, yes, yes to every opportunity that came your way. Obviously, you want to establish that you fear that if you turn down something, it mightn't come again. Around heading into the late 90s, were you able to start and say, right, I can sort of work my own schedule, I'm financially secure, I'm well sort of established, that I can sort of pick and choose now the projects that I want to go at?
Yeah, it was a real gift because I did I finally felt like I was at a place where, and my husband really helped me to realize that that I could say no. Because when you are coming up and you're afraid that the job won't come again, but you have to start to put faith in yourself, and you have to make sure that you do the things that you love, because otherwise, you're going to start resenting the very thing that you created to love. I believe that everybody that goes in this industry has a love affair with it. And the quickest way to end that love affair is by doing things out of duty, or, because you have to. And so realizing that I could choose and decided to choose, and also to make a lot of those choices predicated on my personal life of, I want to be home for the holidays and I want to be with my family. And I missed too many of those. I don't want to miss any more of those, especially as my parents got older. I wanted to be sure that I was there with them, and I didn't miss any more of those holidays because I was doing, live New Year's Eve at Times Square. So it's a real blessing to be able to choose things now.
And I imagine, Susan, and there's probably some of those things you said, oh my God, if I had known down through the years, that you probably had an awful lot of real top quality scripts come your way in terms of audition scripts and readings, and you probably said to yourself, right, maybe not for me at this time. And then obviously you find out maybe a year or two that hits the cinema, you see who play that role, and you think that's probably the role, and it goes a block hit. Were there many of that moments when you looked out and said, yeah, I got that opportunity they came to me first before that girl went for that role of thing? Are there any one of those you think, and then you see it for the time, you said, God, I would have loved to have been in that?
I fortunately, I can't say that is the case. It's not so much with projects, but I've had the opportunity to meet and work with some really incredible musicians along the way that I declined at the time. Had the opportunity to, know Glenn Frey from the Eagles, and Tom Petty. I worked with him a little bit on a TV show, and there's certain people that and it was mostly because I was too shy. Which I look back on it, I go, my gosh, I could have done something. I could have fostered a friendship there with somebody that's really remarkable, but because I was so shy, I didn't allow it to happen. Those are the regrets that I have looking back now, especially, that some of them are gone. Recently, sweet Olivia Newton-John passed, and I was really fortunate that she came back full circle in my life, because I knew her when she was younger, and then we lost touch, and then we reconnected, and I'm so grateful to know her, to be able to call her a friend, because I missed it the first time around, and she just was one of the great ladies.
You mentioned there about this sort of shyness, which is Susan, and obviously people will look at you and your career and say, look, she's appeared on Miss California, she's won beauty contests, obviously like that. Surely she's a very approachable, she's outspoken, she can speak to anyone, she's probably brimming with confidence, she's bringing with sexuality, she's able to show off herself with other girls. It's so daunting to do that. But you mentioned about shyness. Did you have a public sort of thing where you just found it difficult to approach people? Because normally when people look at someone who can put themselves forward for all these competitions, they think, well, she's so in tune with her body, she's so in tune with her vibrance, she's probably bubbling character, full of personality. Is that always the case?
No, it is not always the case. I think that and you've probably talked to a lot of different celebrities. I think if you scratch the surface, you'll see a lot of basically insecure, shy people, that we are attracted to the art of songs and storytelling because we can immerse ourselves into a way to communicate through craft that gives us just one other layer of protection. So it's not necessarily our raw little self up there, saying hello. But it's something that I learned, I learned to make sure that I do go and say hello, and not be worried that I'm going to be, that I'm going to be, like if somebody's busy, like if, after a Broadway show, and my husband would say, aren't you going to go back and say hello? And I go, oh no, they're busy. I don't want to bother them. They go, don't you understand, if you were backstage and you knew that somebody was in the audience and they didn't come back, you would wonder, like, why didn't they come back and say hello? So sometimes you just have to be uncomfortable and go up and say hello anyway. And I've done that enough that now I don't think about it. Now I just automatically go and say hello, your work is wonderful, or I'm a fan. And if they're too busy, then that's their business. But I want to tell them how much I love them.
And Susan, I know you've probably traveled the world and you've been all over the world, but you have dawned on our shores in Ireland once as well. And was that in the 80s, the 90s, or only recently?
It was in the late 80s. There was a show called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And I got the show that went to Ireland, which was fantastic. I was on a train going through the countryside and seeing castles and, the whole extraordinary thing. It was really, you have a magical country. And I have an affinity for the Irish. I mean, obviously my dog's Irish. I love Ireland. I love golf, so all things Irish. I give it to you, laddie.
Yeah. And Susan, you mentioned golf. Are you a keen sort of a player? Is that a sort of secret passion of you? Are you a bit of a tomboy as well? Do you have that sort of sporting element?
I am a definite tomboy. I have been from a little girl. I haven't played golf in a while, but I used to be quite avidly involved with it. Played tournaments all over the place, celebrity tournaments. You get great invitations to go and play with, famous golfers, and Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and Tiger Woods even. And so it was my passion, and it's something that I look forward to getting back to. Everything kind of shut down there with COVID for a little while. And so I'm figuring I'm getting my clubs back because I love it.
And Susan, finally, what's the burning passion for you going forward? Are you thinking to yourself, maybe now's the right time, maybe for an autobiography, a sort of book in the works, or are you holding off on that maybe for a few years down the line yet?
Well, it's a really good question. There again, just before COVID, I had done a workshop of a one-woman show called Full Circle, and it was really my life in song. And we'd done a few venues, and it was being really well received. So it was autobiographical, and the songs and the stories of my life from childhood through to current time, and how it, the backdrop of our culture and world events and all of that. So it's something that's still pulling at my sleeve. I might revisit that, because I was finding it very exciting, because you learn so much about yourself. I would encourage all of your listeners and viewers to do their own version of their own biography, because you have more amazing lives than you even can imagine. When you think of some of the things that you've come through and the problems you figured out, you don't have to be under a big spotlight for that to have value. Your stories are all incredible. And so I would encourage everybody to tell their story.
And I suppose, Susan, Anton, if you looked into the mirror and you saw the reflection of the woman standing there before you as a little girl, would you be happy and proud of how she's turned out today? And if you could say 2 sentences to her, what would those 2 sentences be?
It's so interesting. My husband and I were having this conversation this morning, and I have such a vivid image of myself when I was 8 years old. And I was wearing these little denim overalls with, one strap broken and a little striped t-shirt, and my hair's all in these little pigtails and my face is smudged up. And I look at her whenever I start, wondering where life is going. And I would say, come on with me, I'll take care of you.
Come on with me, I'll take care of you. And she certainly did along the way, and many more chapters left to write as well. Susan, it's great to see you're looking so well, looking so fresh. there today. Obviously, you're piping and earning to go. You're sort of full of bubbling of enthusiasm and life, which is great to see over 50 years in the business. And you still look to be sort of chomping at the bit for more and more, as they say. But Susan, absolute pleasure delving into your life story in this week's episode of Icons of the Entertainment Industry. Pleasure talking to you. Hopefully you'll get to do the train journey around Ireland once more, and who knows, a few hidden gems you might have missed out. You might be well worth taking your time to delve into them a bit more again. But for the moment, Susan, Anton, take care and God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.